today we have to primarily talk about monopoly, right? So what we're doing, let me give you a quick overview what we have done so far and how is this related, right? What we'll do today. Okay, so we talked about economic efficiency. We are doing economic efficiency. We have already discussed what is economic efficiency, why is this important in any economy, and what are the components of economic efficiency, like what ensures that economic efficiency will exist in a country, right? And while discussing all of this, we said that there are two components of efficiency, productive and allocative, right? Both of these two components need to be present in an economy for it to be economically efficient, right? If any of these components is missing, it will not be economically efficient, right? After we said that, then we defined both productive efficiency and allocative efficiency. We looked at the graphs, we discussed what conditions need to hold true for productive efficiency to exist. And similarly, we looked at the graphs to discuss what ensures that allocative efficiency will exist, right? After all this discussion, we talked about that there are two possible scenarios in any country. There are some situations, some scenarios where economic efficiency exists, and there are some situations and scenarios where economic efficiency doesn't exist, right? So the first case that we discussed where economic efficiency exists, and we will do a quick recap of that, and that is perfect competition. Where economic efficiency doesn't exist, right, is monopoly and some other cases that we'll talk about later. But in today's class, after discussing perfect competition, we will talk about monopoly, right? And then we'll see that why in monopoly economic efficiency doesn't exist, right? Just like we talked about how efficiency exists in perfect competition, we looked at the graph, we discussed the graph in detail. Similarly, we will do the same analysis for monopoly. First, talk about the characteristics of monopoly so that we know what type of market is defined as monopoly. And then we'll move forward from there and discuss, look at the graph for monopoly and then see how economic efficiency doesn't exist in a monopoly. Any confusion so far? Okay, are we good? Okay, so if there's any question, feel free to ask me in the middle. Okay, now moving forward from here, right? If you remember, we looked at the graph for perfect competition, but it's been some time, it's been some days. So how about we do a quick recap of the graph of perfect competition, right? Because this is very important. So we said we will make two graphs for perfect competition. One will show you the situation in the industry, and the other graph will show you the situation in a firm, right? What happens in a firm, and on the left hand side will show what happens in industry, right? So on the right graph, we will show the situation of a firm, one single producer, right? And on the left, we will show what is happening in the entire industry. Industry is what? Collection of firms that are producing similar products is known as industry. Now, what we will do is obviously, first of all, we will label the axes. So on the y-axis, we have price and cost. And on the x-axis of the graph, both graphs, we will have output, how much output is being produced, right? And just a second. Similarly, over here on the y-axis, you will have price / cost. And on the x-axis, you will have the quantity of the good being produced, output or quantity, whatever you want to say, right? Oh, sorry about that. Where did it go? Right, so it's output. Okay, now what is the first thing that we need to draw? Let's see if you remember what we did. So Preet, what is the first thing that we need to draw on this graph? What is the first thing that we need to show? Do you remember? So if you remember, we said
the market demand and market supply.
Excellent. Right? So in the industry, how is price determined, right? We already know from our AS economics classes that the price of a product is determined by its demand and supply. What is the total demand for a product in any market, and what is the total supply for that product in that market? That will determine its equilibrium price or market price, as we say, right? So let's say we are producing, because in perfect competition, an ideal example of perfect competition is any agricultural market, right? So let's say you're producing potatoes, right? So what is the total supply of potatoes in a country, in a region? And similarly, what is the total demand for potatoes in a country or in a region? That will determine the market price of that product, right? So let's say each kg of potato is selling for, let's say, 100 rupees. Right? It's selling for 100 rupees per kg, right? Okay, now this is the market price. Now what we need to remember has to sell their output at this price. They cannot charge a higher price. Why? Because the idea is fairly simple. Potatoes produced in a country, right, are exactly the same, especially in a country, right? Even like there might be minor differences in potatoes produced in different regions of the world. In USA, there might be, I don't know, a different taste, a different size, but generally in one region, the type of a certain type of agricultural produce is exactly the same, right? And therefore, when the product is homogeneous, when it is homogeneous, which means it is basically identical, right? There's no difference. Then you can't charge a higher price for that product, right? So that's why every farmer, every producer will charge the same price for that product. And that is why the demand curve of a firm is perfectly elastic. This type of demand curve, we already know that a horizontal demand curve is known as perfectly elastic demand curve. What is this known? Perfectly elastic demand curve, right? Okay, and the elasticity is infinity. Perfectly elastic, we know this through our base economics class, and this is infinity. Okay, now this being said, now this is very important. Now this is very important what we're about to do right now. Okay, now this is the price per unit, right? We have already labeled this. You can see price was 100 rupees per kg. This is the price P1, let's say. Now, this is not only your price, this is also your demand curve. Obviously, the straight horizontal line is also your demand curve, and it is also your marginal revenue. Now, this is where a lot of students get confused that what is marginal revenue? So let's talk about first marginal revenue, and then we'll move forward and discuss other things. Okay, please have a look at this. So marginal revenue, marginal means, if you remember, what did I say? What does the word marginal mean? Marginal, what does the word marginal in economics means? Do you remember?
The extra income earned on like the extra unit sold.
Okay, yes. So you have already given me the definition of marginal revenue, but I was just asking for marginal. That's correct. Marginal revenue, what you said, that was absolutely correct. But marginal in economic or in economics means additional, right? So what is the additional revenue? Additional revenue from what? Additional revenue from sale of additional unit of goods. So if you sell one more unit of the good, what will be the addition in revenue? That is your marginal revenue. Just like we said, what is marginal cost? Marginal cost is the increase in cost due to production of one more unit of the good. So if you increase your output by one more unit, what will be the rise in your cost? That is your marginal cost. Similarly, marginal revenue is the rise in revenue due to production of one more unit of good. Okay. Now this is a new thing that I'm introducing, but this should not be that difficult for you. Okay. Now what is delta? Delta means change. Delta means change. And this is a mathematical notation. So change in revenue, right? So how do we calculate marginal revenue? How much is the change in revenue divided by due to change in output? That is how you write it down. Right? Are you following? Right? So what is the change in revenue due to change in output? That is your marginal revenue, right? Similarly, what would be the change? What would be the formula for marginal cost? How much is the change in cost? So this triangle, as I've already told you, this means delta. Delta means change. So what is the change in cost due to change in output, due to production of one more unit of code? That is your marginal cost. So this is something that you need to remember. Apart from the definition, you also need to know how we calculate each of these two variables. Is this making sense? Is it making sense? Is there any confusion that if there's any confusion, anything that's not clear, please ask me, right? Because this term, these two terms will be using again and again repeatedly, right? So marginal revenue, how much additional revenue each product gives you, each product meaning each unit of the good gives you, and how much will be the additional cost from producing one more unit of the good, that is marginal cost. Any confusion? Please, is everything clear so far? If there's any confusion, please ask me, right? So, okay, let me write this down in much neater form. Okay, now this straight horizontal line, I've already told you, this is showing you the price, this is also the demand curve, and this is also your marginal revenue, right? So let's not go into the details of why marginal revenue is also the same line. So if I have to give you a simple example, think about this. If every kg, now here's the thing, let me explain you if you are interested and still confused that why is marginal revenue the same as the price. So the reason for that is if every unit of the good is being sold for 100 rupees, if every kg of potatoes is sold for 100 rupees per kg. So every time you sell one more unit, which means every time you sell one more kg of potatoes, how much additional revenue will you generate? How much additional revenue will you generate, Preet? Every time, if the price
It's
is
a
fixed,
100.
100 rupees. Excellent, right? So that's why in this case the price is equals to marginal revenue. Whatever you're charging for each unit of the good, that is not changing at all, right? So price is always fixed in this case. That's why each additional unit will generate you 100 rupees of revenue. Okay, very good. Now moving forward, let's add some other graphs. We said we will add two other graphs on this, curves on this diagram, right? So one will be of the marginal cost, that is a J-shaped graph like this. What is marginal cost? We have already discussed. The addition in cost due to production of 1 million of the good. And the third and the last thing that you need to add to this graph is your average total cost, which looks like this. It's a U-shaped graph. Again, one thing I would want to mention before we move on, all the cost and revenue things that we are discussing right now, if you're able to understand at this point in time, that is even better, right? Because that is the reason why I'm giving you definition of every new term that we come across. But in case there is still any confusion left, do remember that in unit 2 we have a complete topic where we talk about firm's cost and revenue. We talk about what is the firm cost and what is the firm revenue, so you will get a better idea when we reach that part of the syllabus, right? So I will tell you, even when we reach unit 2, we will talk about why the shape of ATC is like this, why the shape of marginal cost is like this, and all of this is part of our syllabus. So we'll do that, don't worry. Okay, so now I will ask you a question. If you remember, we talked about this in the last class. What is the profit maximization quantity for a business? What is the profit maximization? At what output level the firm maximizes his profit? Do you remember?
When the marginal cost is equal to the marginal revenue.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Correct. Very good. Excellent. Right. So when the marginal revenue, where the marginal revenue of a firm is equals to marginal cost, that is the point, right? Where the firm maximizes its profit. Now, if you're curious to know that why is this the quantity where the profit is maximized, right? So there is a complete calculation, involved, through which we derive, like economists, we meaning economists, right? Economists derive this, right? But you don't need to know how this is the profit maximization quantity. All you need to remember that this is the output level for which, at which any firm will maximize its profit. So this is the output level where the business, any business, will maximize its profit. So this will always be the profit maximization quantity for any business, right? We got on this. Okay, now let's see where is marginal revenue and where is marginal cost. Okay, now have a look at this. This is marginal cost, we know this, and this straight horizontal line is your marginal revenue. So where is the green and the pink line intersecting? The green and the pink line are intersecting over here. What you will do is you'll bring this dotted line down to the x-axis and you will label it as QP. Why am I labeling it as QP? Because this is the profit maximization quantity. Any confusion so far? Anything that's not clear? Right? This is good, right? So basically it means that whatever this quantity is, I don't know, let's say 500 kgs. This means that if this firm, what does this mean? This means that if this firm produces 500 kgs of potatoes, we assume that this is the market for potatoes, then that is the output level where the firm will maximize his profit. Maximize its profit. Easy, we good? Okay, now think about this. This was the profit maximization quantity. Now, another thing that we discussed in the last class, what is the point of allocative efficiency? At what output
The
level?
point at which ATC is lowest.
Sorry, repeat it. Allocative efficiency. Where is, what output level is allocatively efficient?
Like the same point when the profit maximization is achieved.
Right. Yeah. But it is same point only in the case of perfect competition, right? So only in the case of perfect competition, the profit maximization quantity is the same as allocatively efficient output level. But in other cases, even in monopoly that we will discuss after this, you will see that profit maximization point is different from allocatively efficient output level. So what you need to remember is, just like you remembered that marginal cost is equals to marginal revenue, this is profit maximization quantity. Similarly, you need to always remember that where the price of the product is equals to its marginal cost, where the price of the product is equal to its marginal cost, that is allocatively, this point is allocatively efficient. Does it make sense? This point is allocatively efficient. But in this case, if you see, have a look at this. In the case of perfect competition, if you see, this is your perfect competition, sorry, this is your marginal cost, and this is your price. So even your allocatively efficient output level is also the same as your profit maximization quantity. Your allocatively efficient output level is also the same as your profit maximization quantity. Any confusion about this? Please, this is making sense, right? So yeah, this is what you need to remember, that this point, this output level maximizes the profit for a firm, and this output level is allocatively efficient, which means that you are producing the goods in the right quantity, where the price of the good is equals to marginal cost, that is allocatively efficient, and this upper criteria is for profit maximization. So this is, let me write this down separately so that you can remember in the future. This is allocatively efficient output, and this upper one is profit maximization output. Profit maximization output. Okay, now this being said, we'll move on and we will see, we have just seen in fact that the firm in perfect competition, like this graph that we have just made, right? This is for perfect competition. The firm in perfect competition will be allocatively efficient. The firm in perfect competition is allocatively efficient. How do we know this? We know this because the point or the output of profit maximization is the same output as allocatively efficient output level, right? So there's no difference between the two. After this, when we come to the monopoly part, you will see that profit maximization point will be different from the allocatively efficient output level, right? And that will show us that monopoly is not allocatively efficient. But this firm is allocatively efficient because the profit maximization quantity and the allocatively efficient output levels are coinciding, like they are the same, right? Easy? This is making sense. Okay, now we move on to the last, right? Do let me know if there's any confusion. Now we are about to move to the last piece of our discussion, and that is whether this firm is productively efficient or not. Now, if you remember, we said a firm is productively efficient when it is producing on the lowest point, lowest possible ATC. So when a firm is producing on the lowest possible ATC curve, have a look at this, right? So these are three different, excuse me, if these are three possible ATC curves, let's say this is ATC 1, let's label it. Then there is another ATC curve which is beneath this, right? Let's say ATC 2, and then you have, let's say ATC 3, right? Now, this is ATC 3, right? Now, this one, which is the lowest most ATC is your ATC, is your productively efficient ATC. ATC 2 is your productively efficient ATC because this is the lowest ATC compared to the other possible options. Is this making sense? Preet, is it making sense? Okay, very good, excellent, right? Now think about this. How do we know if the firm in perfect competition, we have already seen that the firm in perfect competition is allocatively efficient because the point of profit maximization and the point of allocatively efficiency is the same, right? Very good, excellent. But we haven't proved yet that this firm is also productively efficient. But by looking at this graph, we can tell that this firm is also productively efficient. Why? Because here comes in the trick part. If this ATC would have been even slightly higher, let's draw like this, right? Now, let's say it's not the blue line, it's the red line. If the ATC would have been over here at the red line. Now, think about this. How much is the price that you're charging? Preet, how much is the price that you're charging for each unit of the good? Can you tell me?
The market price.
Right. And how much is that? How much is that?
100.
100 rupees. Excellent. So for each unit of the good, you are charging the market price, which is 100 rupees. Easy? Okay. At this output level, if this is the ATC, the red one that I've labeled over here. Now, can you see that price is this level is 100. This level would be 100, right? From 0 to this point, it would be 100. Easy. There's no confusion about that, right? Now, if ATC is higher than this, if ATC is higher than this, can you see what I'm trying to do over here? Then this means obviously it would be higher than 100. Isn't that higher than 100? Right? Because this is higher than this mark, right? So it would be, let's say, 105. So if this is your cost of producing is 105 and you're selling each unit for 100, would you make a profit? If the cost of producing the good is
No,
100,
sir.
exactly, right? So what I wanted to prove over here is that if a firm in perfect competition has its ATC even slightly higher than the demand curve, then it will make a loss. And therefore, it will not be able to survive in the market. I'll repeat that. If a firm in perfect competition has an ATC, which is this, higher than the demand curve, then it means that the cost of producing that product, will be higher than the price at which you're selling. Therefore, obviously, it's not a profit, it's a loss. It's a loss. Easy. But let me ask you another question. How is this a profit? How am I saying that this is a profit? Did you get my point? When the price is equals to cost, is that a profit? Would you define that as a profit?
No, sir.
Right. There's a word for it, right? So when the price is exactly equal to cost, what is that called? That is called break even. You might not have heard the word. Have you ever heard the word break even, right? So break even is, think about this. So a quick recap would help here. Have a look at this. So if your revenue, what is revenue? How much you're selling the good for? How much you're selling the good for, right? That's your revenue. You can also write prices. Okay, let's use the word price because that keeps things simple and easy, right? So price is basically how much you're selling the good for, right? And cost is how much it costs you to produce the good, right? So price minus cost is your profit, right? Now, obviously, we know if price is greater than cost, right? So if you're selling something for 500 rupees and it costs you 450 rupees to produce, then you are making a profit of, let's say, 50 rupees. As simple as that. If you're selling a good for 500 and the cost of producing that product is also 500, obviously you make no profit, no loss. And we call this situation break even. You are just meeting your cost. You're just meeting your cost. You're not making a profit, right, on this product. And this is exactly what is happening over here. This is exactly what is happening in perfect competition. And I'm calling it a profit. Now, this is something that we'll talk about later on. Now, I know there are a lot of things that I say that we'll talk about later on. I can explain you this thing right now, but this will be too confusing for you to grasp, right? So this thing where the price is equals to cost in economics, right? What other subjects do you take, by the way, Preet? I'm asking this because then I can see if you have studied accounting. You do take accounting, right? You do take
Yes, sir.
accounting and business.
Accounting, business, and economics both.
Economics and accounting both. Yeah, I do remember. Okay. Now,
Economics, accounting, business, all three.
all three. Amazing. Okay. Now, so what I was saying, in the case of accounting, you would not have called it profit. In the case of accounting, and even in the case of business studies, you would not have called it profit. You would have called it break even because price is just equals to cost. But in economics, we call it profit, and the word for this is normal profit. What do we call it? So when the price is equals to cost, we call it normal profit. Like economists call it normal profit. Why is this normal profit? When we go to the second unit, only then we will be able to understand. So I would suggest that we do not go in the details of this at the moment, right? When we move to the second unit over there, I'll explain you in detail that what normal profit means and what it is and so on and so forth. Right? For now, let's just focus on whether this market is economically efficient or not. And coming back to the point, we have to look for two things. We have to look for whether it's allocatively efficient or not, and we have to look for whether it's productively efficient or not. For the first part, allocative efficiency, we have just shown that since the allocatively efficient output level is the same as your profit maximization output, it is allocatively efficient, where the profit maximization quantity will coincide with allocatively efficient output level, that will be allocatively efficient. Now, for the second part, whether this is productively efficient or not, and the answer to that is yes, because even if the ATC would have been slightly higher than this, like not at the demand curve, but slightly higher than this, like the one that I've drawn right now, it would have caused the company to make a loss, and therefore the company or the business would not have been able to survive in the market. So all firms, long story short, all firms in perfect competition are both productively and allocatively efficient. Now, let's take a small pause and you tell me if everything is adding up, if everything is making sense, or if there is any confusion that you want to clarify.
So everything is clear.
Absolutely, very good, excellent. Right, so all firms in perfect competition are economically efficient. Competition are economically efficient. Okay, now your life will become a little more easier because we are about to start off with monopoly, and only when you will look at monopoly, you will have a better understanding of how monopoly is not economically efficient and so on and so forth, and that will also help you better understand perfect competition. Okay, now monopoly is the other extreme. Now think about this. Before we begin here, let me tell you what we're doing. So we've already discussed how perfect competition has economic efficiency, and now we are about to discuss that how monopoly, what is monopoly first thing, and then how in monopoly there is no economic efficiency, right? So that's what we are proceeding towards. So you already know the definition of monopoly, and you told me in one of the earlier classes, monopoly is a market where there is either a single producer, which means that there is only one company that is producing that good or service, right? Or if there is not a single producer, then that firm has a very high market share. Do you know what market share is? Do you know what a market share is?
Yes, sir. The percentage of customer of the total sales a firm is having from the market.
Very good. Excellent. That's correct. A market where there is either a single firm, right? Or one dominant firm with a very high market share, right? So that is how we define the word with, just a second, with very high market share. Okay, now this being said, we already know what a monopoly is, right? You already know what very high market share, right? You already know what market share is. So market share is basically the percentage of the total market sales that is captured by one business. And the way we calculate market share for a firm, right, is that we simply divide the sales of the firm with the total industry or total market sales, right? So market share of, let's say, company A or company B, whatever it is, right? So if you have to think about Apple market share in India, right? So you will see how much is the sale that Apple phones make in a year in a certain time period out of the total cell phone sales that take place in India, and that multiplied by 100. So if this turns out to be 30%, this means that out of average, on average, 30 out of 100 customers, out of 100 customers that buy phones in India, right? 30% of those consumers, 30 customers buy Apple, and the remaining 70 customers buy other brands like, I don't know, Samsung, blah, blah, blah. There would be a lot of other brands, right? So that is what market share is. The higher the market share, obviously beneficial for the company. Okay. Now, this being said, now what we'll do next is that we'll talk about the characteristics of monopoly, just like we did for perfect competition. Do you remember we talked about that there are a lot of firms, and then there are no entry and exit barriers, and we discussed about all those things. So characteristics of monopoly. Okay, now here we go. What is Monopoly, we have already discussed. Now, what are the main characteristics or features that define this type of market structure? Single producer, right? So you can either write single producer or one firm with very high market share. But for the sake of simplicity, let's assume that it's a single producer. I'm sure in Pakistan, let's say there is only one railway firm, right? So Pakistan Railway is the only firm that provide railway services in Pakistan. So by definition, that is a monopoly, right? And similarly, you can find similar examples in other countries as well. Okay, now there's a single producer. Okay, great. Then another thing that you need to know, and that's very important, very high, very high entry and exit barriers. Now, the second thing is entry and exit barriers. So the first question that anyone should ask themselves, that why is there only one firm in the market? Right? So think about this. Isn't this very natural to ask ourselves that if there's only one firm in the market, there has to be a reason for it. And what reason economics can provide us? The reason for this that economics provide us is that it's difficult for the new firms to enter the market, because otherwise, obviously, some other firms would have entered. Yes or no? Right? So very high entry and exit barriers. And we already know what entry barriers mean. So simplest example, real life example that I can give you over here is that since Pakistan Railway is owned by the government of Pakistan and they haven't deregulated the market, deregulated meaning they haven't allowed the private firms to enter the market. That's why you will not find any other firm in the market. As simple as that, right? Are you getting me? So that is an entry barrier, that it's a legal constraint, right? It's a legal constraint that the government is not allowing any private company to produce or provide railway services, right, in Pakistan. So that is why it's a monopoly. So we already know that the entry and exit barriers will be high, right? It's not very easy for the new firms to enter the market, right? Okay, now moving on. Now this is getting interesting. If there is a single producer in the market, do you expect the price elasticity of demand, right? Preet, now this is linked to what you have studied in ES. So would you expect the price elasticity of demand for the product where there's a single producer to be more elastic or to be less elastic? What do you think? Should the price elasticity of demand for the product
So
be
very less elastic.
less elastic? Excellent. Just give me a second. Let me drink some water. Excellent, excellent. Right? So you would expect it to be very less elastic. Why? Because there is no competition. Demand is inelastic, right? Because there is no competition, so consumers have no option but to buy from the same firm. Yes or no? Demand is inelastic and monopoly is price maker. Now, what do I mean by price maker? Let me explain you over here. So think about this. Now you have to be very careful with the language that I use here and there, right? Because in A2, there will be a lot of different words that you are coming across and you need to know what each of those means, right? And they also test you, the examiners also test you on these words on the exam, right? So you have to be familiar with that. In perfect competition, I said firms are price taker. I said in perfect competition, firms are price taker. Whatever price is prevailing in the market, they can only sell at that price. They can't charge a higher price than that. But in the case of monopoly, since you are the only firm, whatever price you set, consumers have no option but to buy that product at that price. So demand is inelastic and monopoly is price maker, right? Making sense? Okay. Demand is inelastic and monopoly is price maker. Okay. This being said, very high entry and exit barrier, single producer. Just a second. If there is I'm thinking, and one thing more that you can write, the demand curve, since demand is inelastic. Okay, another question. Do you expect the demand curve to be steep or do you expect the demand curve to be flat? Do you expect the demand curve, if it's inelastic, what do you know? Yeah.
So steep.
Will be steep. Excellent, right? We already know that the more steep the demand curve is, the more inelastic the demand is, right? Exactly. We have already studied this in our AS syllabus. So the demand curve will be steep. Okay. Now, this being said, we will move on and look at the graph. Let's quickly recap what we've just discussed. Monopoly, single producer, there's only one firm, or if there are multiple firms, there is at least one firm with a very high market share. Then the entry and exit barriers are very high. It's not very easy for the new firms to enter the market. Demand is inelastic, right? Because you don't have much substitutes, and monopoly is price maker, which means whatever price it sets for the product, consumers have to buy at that price. And the demand curve will be steep, right? Right? Okay. Now, this being said, let's move on and look at the graph for monopoly. Okay. Now, first thing first, obviously, you will just draw the graph like this. Oh, okay. Then you will label the axes again. So you will have price on the y-axis, and you will have price and cost on the y-axis, and the output of the good that is being produced on the x-axis. So price and cost and output on the x-axis. Okay. Now, first thing what you have to mention here is that there will be a downward sloping demand curve. The first thing that you have to draw, and think about this. I will not draw a demand curve like this for monopoly. I will not draw anything like this. I will instead draw a demand curve that is relatively more steep, right? Because steep, we have already discussed that demand is inelastic, so it should be steep, right? So it should be like this. I just want to move, sorry. I'm just moving it a little higher, but it will be steep like this, right? Steep like this. Easy? Okay. Now, this is interesting. Now, this is your demand curve. And what does the demand curve show us? Right? So what does the demand curve show us? Demand curve shows us the price. So can I write D equals P, right? Because basically what is the thing that demand curve shows, right? Demand curve shows if I choose a random point over here, P. So this, sorry, not P, A, right? So this point A shows us that, let's say 100 units of the good will be purchased at a price of, let's say, $10 each, right? That is basically what any demand curve shows us. So since it is showing us the price as well, that's why I've just written demand D equals P, like demand curve showing us the price, right? That is what it means. Nothing more, nothing less, right? Similarly, if I choose any other random point on the demand curve, let's say, let's label it as B, this might be showing us that $15, if $15 is the price of each unit of the good, then the total demand in the market will be 80 units or something of the sort. Easy, good, can move on. Okay. Now, here is where the things are becoming a little interesting. In this case, in the case of monopoly, your marginal revenue, I did not say that this is your marginal revenue, right? So this graph is not your marginal revenue. Where will the marginal revenue be? Marginal revenue will lie to the left. The marginal revenue curve in monopoly will lie to the left of the demand curve. Why? I'll explain you, right? Now, marginal revenue is downward sloping. First thing that you must have observed in perfect competition, it was the same graph and it was straight horizontal line. What was the reason? Because every unit was generating the same revenue for you. Every additional unit was generating the same revenue for the firm in perfect competition, but that is not the case in monopoly. How do we know that is not the case for monopoly? Because whenever the demand curve is downward sloping, whenever the demand curve is downward sloping, think about this. This shows that each additional unit is selling for less. This means that each additional unit is selling for less. How do we know that? Because think about this. Until unless you do not reduce the price, your quantity will not increase. Your quantity will not increase until unless the demand is decreasing. Sorry, the price is decreasing. Does it make sense? Therefore, what it means is that your marginal revenue is downward sloping, showing that each additional unit is generating less revenue for the business. Each additional unit is generating less revenue for the business. Does it make sense? Preet, is making sense? So marginal revenue in the case of monopoly will be to the left of the demand curve. Marginal revenue in monopoly would lie to the left of the demand curve, right? Not the same graph, right? Easy. And the reason and the explanation for that is that each additional unit is generating less revenue for the firm. We good? We good on that? Okay. Apart from this, everything else will be the same. Apart from this, now think about this. Now I'm explaining you again, and I'm saying you that we will discuss all the things like the revenue part and the cost graphs in more detail when we go to unit 2 of the syllabus, right? the next level, the next unit, right? For now, you just need to take things as given. Okay. The other thing that you need to remember that cost graphs are same for all types of business. So don't ever get confused. The cost graph, the shape of the cost graph, right, are same for all types of businesses, which means that whether you are a perfect competition firm or you're a monopoly firm, the cost graphs will not change. Cost graphs are same for all type of businesses. Does this make sense? Is this simple? Is this clear? Right? Can we move on? Okay. Now, what will be the shape of the marginal cost? The shape of the marginal cost will be the same as the one that we have seen in perfect competition. It's always J-shaped. What is the shape of the marginal cost? It's J-shaped like this. Right? Preet, do you have a question?
No, sir.
Okay, perfect. Now, the shape of the marginal cost is the same as we made in perfect competition. You can see over here, right? Right? J-shaped graph. Okay. Now, what would be the shape of the average total cost? Again, the shape of the average total cost will also be the same as the one we made in, as the one that we made in perfect competition. So it's always U-shaped graph. It's always U-shaped graph. Right. So this brings us towards the completion of our monopoly graph. This brings us to the completion of monopoly graph. Now, all we have to do is to analyze and see whether this monopoly graph is economically efficient or not. So what we're about to do next is to see whether this graph is economically efficient or not. Okay. Now let's have a look at it. Okay. So what is the profit maximization quantity? We already know that where the marginal revenue intersects with the marginal cost, that is profit maximization quantity. So this green line is your marginal revenue. This orange line is your marginal cost. You put a dot where the two are intersecting, and then you bring the dotted line down to the x-axis and you label it as QP, which means it's profit maximization quantity. Any confusion so far? Right? That was exactly what we did in perfect competition. Where the marginal cost, we saw where the marginal cost graph was cutting with the marginal revenue graph. We put a dot over there, we bring the dotted line down and we label it as QP, which means that it is profit maximization quantity. That's the first part to it. The second part is to see where is allocative efficiency point. Now you tell me by looking at the graph, Preet, where is allocatively efficient output level? At what point? Where what two graphs will intersect?
So where demand and marginal costs are intersecting.
Excellent, 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 right? So where the price, which is basically the demand curve, as you rightly said, is intersecting with the marginal cost. So the purple, I don't know if this is purple, pink, whatever. So it's not purple, pink, right? So where the pink line is intersecting with the orange line, that is where it will be allocatively efficient. Now, can you see what I was telling you before? Allocatively efficient output level is greater than the output level of profit maximization. Allocatively efficient output level is greater than the output of profit maximization, right? Now, what does this show? What does this show? Does this show that the monopoly will be allocatively efficient, or is it showing that the monopoly will not be allocatively efficient? What is this showing us? What is this showing us? Right, yeah. So think about this.
So
What is the what
inefficient.
yeah, sorry.
So the firm will be inefficient.
The firm will be allocatively inefficient. Excellent. Reason being, reason is simple. And the reason is that you are not producing for this firm to be allocatively efficient. It should have produced 100 units, whereas it's only producing at the point which maximizes its profit, right? And that is 90 units. That's why I've also written quantities in front of that. So since there is a difference between allocatively efficient point, which is much further on the right, compared to profit maximization quantity, therefore monopoly will produce this output and it will not produce this output. It will not produce this output, right? So it is not allocatively efficient. Excellent, excellent. Now, the second and the last part. Do you think that monopoly will care about the cost that it takes to produce a good? which basically means we are talking about productive efficiency, because productive efficiency, as we already know, it talks about the ATC curve, whether this ATC curve is the growth curve or not. So my simple question to you is, if you are a monopoly, let's say think of Pakistan Railway, right? So if it's the only business that provides railway services in Pakistan, should the firm be very much concerned about that their costs are high? And
No.
yes or no?
No.
Why not? Why not?
Mm, because like if it is a necessity, then higher cost will also be paid.
That's a very good explanation. That's correct. That's correct. And then there is another aspect to it. The other aspect to this is, Preet, that even if your cost is high, now I did mention that while we were talking about characteristics of monopoly, that you are a price maker. You are a price maker. Obviously, government organizations don't want to maximize profit. Like, they are not strictly profit making entities, but a private monopoly would want to maximize profit. So even if the cost is high, even if the cost of production is high, you don't need to worry about if you're a monopoly. You can easily increase your price because there is no competition in the market, and you can still earn higher profit that you need. So not my economic explanation of this says that monopoly will not care about higher cost of production, because they know that being the single producer in the market, they can set whatever price they want to for their consumers, and they will still be buying their product because the demand is inelastic, as you said, necessity, right? And there's no competition for that, and monopoly would still be earning the high profits that it wishes to achieve. Right? Does it make sense? So that is what you need to remember. Even if a monopoly has higher cost, it can still earn higher profits by setting higher prices. Did you get this part? Is making sense, Preet? That thing about this. So I
Yes.
said, right? So the idea is fairly simple, right? So businesses, think about this. When do we care about prices? Sorry, when do we care about cost, right? When there's more competition and we know we can't charge higher prices. So think about this. If Mega Lecture is the only online teaching platform in Pakistan and we are a monopoly basically, then we are not very much concerned about being inefficient. Even if our cost of production is higher, we don't really care, because we can charge higher prices to students, right? Our customers, right? Because they don't have any other option online, right? But since that is not true, there is competition and we have to beat the competition, right? So there is a limit to how much high prices we can charge. So therefore, you have to be careful with the cost. You want to keep your cost at the minimum possible level, right? So coming back to the point, as I said, even if a monopoly has higher cost, it can earn higher profits by setting higher prices. Therefore, monopoly doesn't really aims for productive efficiency. Therefore, monopoly doesn't really aim for productive efficiency, which means it doesn't really care about minimizing its cost. Care about productive efficiency, about, right? So that is what explains that the firm in, like, the monopoly firm will neither be productively efficient and neither allocatively efficient, right? And therefore, that is why monopoly is a market failure. Do you remember? I told you about that. So when economic efficiency doesn't exist, what do we call that? When economic efficiency doesn't exist in the market, what do we call that? There's a word for it, and that is market
Market.
failure. Exactly. So by looking at the graph for monopoly and seeing that it is neither allocatively efficient nor productively efficient, we know that monopoly is a case of market failure. Any confusion so far? Any confusion? Anything that's not clear? Anything you want more explanation on?
But I like in some cases like
Hmm.
railways and
Hmm.
armies, these are like completely monopolies only. So
Yeah.
like in this case, they prevent market failure also.
Yeah. So are you saying this because these monopolies are owned by the government? Is that what your argument is?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So Preet, think about this. So obviously, being government-owned business, they don't strictly aim for profit maximization, right? But let's slightly change our example. So let's assume that there is any one business that is privately owned and that's a monopoly, right? So let's say in any small town there is only one fancy restaurant, right? So let's think about this. So let's say in any town, small town or a region, there is only one fancy restaurant or one Chinese restaurant that offers Chinese cuisine or Italian cuisine, I don't know, sushi or whatever, right? Now that business, that restaurant will be a monopoly in itself because there's no other restaurant for competition who is selling the same, food. So that restaurant can charge higher prices to its customers, even if it's inefficient in the sense that, even if their chef cost a lot, even if the rent that they're paying is very high, even if they have higher charges for the electricity and, other expenses, overheads, you do study accounting, you would know they don't really care because they can charge higher prices to their customers and still make higher profits. So that is basically, how monopoly will be inefficient because it is, exploiting the consumers. It's exploiting the consumers. Similarly, if there is only one big hospital, I think would be a better example for that because going to a restaurant is a choice. It's more of a choice, right? You can go to it, you might not want to, right, if it's too expensive, but going to a hospital is a necessity, right? So let's say if there's only one advanced cancer hospital, right? So in Pakistan, I think there's only one cancer hospital full functioning proper, right? That's not a private business, that's more of a charity work. But if that would have been a private business, just imagine, don't you think that they could have exploited consumers? Cancer, I mean, people have to get treatment, God forbid, if they have cancer and, they are ready to spend some big amount on that, right? And they can totally exploit the consumer. So that's the thing. Government owned monopolies are a slightly different case, and we'll talk even more about that. So they don't really exploit consumers that much, right? Because they're welfare, because government is giving them funds to kind of, government can also support them and so on. But private monopolies will try their level best to exploit consumers as much as they can. That's the argument. But long story short, we will assume for normal purposes that private monopoly is not allocatively efficient through the analysis that we just did because it is neither allocatively efficient nor productively efficient. Right? Right? So Preet, we'll stop here for today. Do think about it. Do think about some interesting life examples, real life examples. If there are any other examples that come to your mind and want to discuss. So tomorrow, just like any other classes, we do a quick recap. So we'll recap what we did in Monopoly today and then we'll take it forward from there. Right? So now there's another class, and for tomorrow, how about if I start a class at 3? So your time would be 3:30. Would that sound good? Preet?
Yes, perfect.
3:30. I'll inform you in advance. Okay, so I'll see you tomorrow. Have a good night, right? And take care.
Oh,
Okay, bye.
okay, bye.
Bye.